Send it to 7766. The Total Request Weekend on Gold FM.
93 or 93.2 FM, island-wide.
The news headlines on Gold FM.
Good evening. This is Zulia De Silva for Gold FM, bringing you your news in detail. In your news headlines, Iranian sailors to get 1 month free relief visa. US respects Sri Lanka's sovereignty on Iran ship decisions. Opposition leader calls for peace in the Indian Ocean and a permanent seat for India in the UNSC. The ball ends tonight for the CEB. And in sports news, T20 World Cup final today.
The top story on Gold FM.
The government will provide 1 month relief visas to the Iranian naval personnel rescued from the Indian Ocean. This was communicated by the Minister of Public Security, Ananda Vijaypala. He emphasized that this move is a humanitarian gesture made under international conventions and does not imply support for any party involved in the ongoing conflict. He stated that the decision was made to ensure that the sailors' legal status is maintained in a humanitarian manner while they receive medical care and await other types of care, without being biased to any international partners. 22 Iranian sailors, including the captain of the sunken warship Iristina, were discharged from the Gaul National Hospital, while 10 other sailors remain in medical care following the American strike on their vessel. Meanwhile, the United States State Department responded to reports suggesting it is pressuring Sri Lanka regarding the handling of the second Iranian ship, the Irish Bushehr, and its crew. Responding to an inquiry made by our news team, a State Department spokesperson said that the US respects and recognizes Sri Lanka's sovereignty in the handling of the situation regarding the Iranian ships and crew, and that the ultimate disposition of the Irish Bushehr and its crew, as well as the Iranian sailors rescued at sea, is a decision for Sri Lanka to make, pursuant to its domestic law and international legal obligations. It confirmed that the US is pursuing active dialogue with Colombo, noting that its utmost goal is to mitigate the threat that Iran poses to the US and its partners. Meanwhile, the United States Indo-Pacific Command denied claims that the Iranian warship Iristina was unarmed, saying that it was a valid military target under the law of armed conflict. It added that US forces planned for and Sri Lanka provided life-saving support to survivors following the strike.
This is the local news on Gold FM.
The Indian Ocean must remain a zone of peace that is not involved in any conflict. That's the view of opposition leader Sajith Premadasa. In an interview with India's WION, the opposition leader stressed that peace and international law must govern national responses to crises.
This particular incident took place apparently beyond our territorial waters in our exclusive economic zone. This is a zone which is not a zone of conflict, it's a zone of peace. The Middle Eastern war has now come into the Indian Ocean and it's virtually at our doorstep. Humanitarianism is of utmost importance in our foreign policy, and we will adhere to the international standards that have quite clearly prescribed as to how a nation state should act in times of war, in times of conflict in the high seas, in terms of conflict in the exclusive economic zones, and so on and so forth. What is of paramount importance is to maintain the Indian Ocean area, this particular zone, as a zone of peace.
Meanwhile, speaking to India's NDTV, the opposition leader stressed that peace and stability is of the utmost importance, and also spoke about India's role in maintaining that.
I have always taken due cognizance of the importance of India as a country and the role it has to play globally. That is the reason why I have promoted India attaining a permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council, because that would be a much more realistic representation of the global power configuration. India has an important role to play to promote peace. India and His Excellency Sri Modi must capture this opportunity and play a vital role, an indispensable role to promote regional peace and global peace. That is of utmost importance. And I believe that India has a lot of power within its hands to promote peace. And I am confident and sure of all of the initiatives of Sri Modi, which are aimed at attaining global peace. And we must ensure that conflict does not prevail. It is in the interest of all human beings.
4 Sri Lankan nationals sustained injuries during the intensifying military conflict between Iran and a coalition involving Israel and the United States. Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs Arun Hemachandra confirmed that all 4 individuals received medical treatment and left hospital following their recovery. The Ceylon Electricity Board will be abolished at midnight, marking the end of nearly 50 years of history for the state utility. The dissolution follows a massive restructuring process mandated under the International Monetary Fund's recommendations to address the severe debts and losses incurred by state institutions following the 2020 economic crisis. Starting tomorrow, the CEB's powers will be transferred to 6 newly established successor companies. Chief executive officers were appointed to 3 of these entities. Engineer KSI Kumara was appointed as the CEO of Electricity Distribution Lanka Private Limited. Engineer NG Salia Panditratna was named as the CEO of Electricity Generation Lanka Private Limited. Meanwhile, engineer NS Vittasinghe will take over as the CEO of the National Transmission Network Service Provider Private Limited. The remaining 3 institutions, created under the Sri Lanka Electricity Amendment Act, are expected to have their leadership finalised in the coming weeks. As the CEB ceases operations at midnight, all existing trade unions within the board will also be rendered void. As such, more than 40 trade unions are currently in the process of re-registering under the new employer structures. The Sri Lankan Navy recovered heroin and cocaine worth nearly 3 billion rupees from a multi-day fishing trawler intercepted in the deep seas south of the island. Statements from the 6 suspects in custody reveal an Iranian vessel transferred the narcotics to their boat following its departure from Galle Harbour for fishing activities on the 13th. Officers discovered over 103 kilograms of heroin packed into 92 bundles, alongside 913 grams of cocaine during the special operation. The suspects in the vessel arrived at the Dikkovita Fisheries Harbour this morning for further investigation. The Narcotics Bureau continues to record statements as the legal process against the crew commences.
Now for some news in brief.
Hirumangalam, the wedding exhibition conceptualized by Hiru Media Network chairman Raina Silva, concluded today with a lucky couple being chosen to have their dream wedding paid for.
The business news on Gold FM.
Investment banks and financial analysts are warning of a significant spike in global energy costs as the conflict in the Middle East continues to throttle supply through the Strait of Hormuz. Goldman Sachs stated that oil prices are likely to exceed $100 per barrel next week if the severe disruption to maritime flows remain unresolved. The bank estimated that average daily flows through the vital waterway plummeted by 90%. Barclays offered an even more stark outlook, suggesting that Brent crude could test $120 a barrel if hostilities persist for another fortnight. This market volatility was reflected in Friday's trading, where US crude oil posted its largest weekly gain in futures history. Bloomberg analyst Javier Blas further cautioned that in a worst-case scenario, prices could potentially reach $200 $100 a barrel. However, there is a catch.
If the Strait of Hormuz is closed for 60 days, what does that look like for the US and for Europe?
A crisis anywhere is a crisis everywhere. Price is going to go up for everyone. The oil market is not really thinking about 60 days. I think it's thinking more about 6 days at the moment. It will mean a significant oil shock. People say, oh, worst case scenario is $100 oil. On a truly worst case scenario, what I will call a really worst case scenario, I think that we go north of $200. It will imply an economic shock of the size that the central banks will have to intervene, etc., etc. It's very ugly. That's one of the reasons that I cannot see this lasting 60 days. I think that the White House will call it over a lot earlier. You know, having achieved killing the supreme leader, I think that President Trump can turn around and say, I'm done any day, and still claim that he achieved a lot. Again, we can't just question whether killing the supreme leader actually brings us closer to have a prosperous, democratic, and stable Iran, because I don't think it does.
In a move to stabilize the market, US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent signaled that the United States may lift sanctions on additional Russian oil supplies. This follows a temporary 30-day waiver granted to Indian refiners to purchase stranded Russian crude, a measure intended to alleviate the current global supply squeeze.
International news on Gold FM.
The Assembly of Experts in Tehran is hinting that a successor to the late Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has finally been selected. Assembly member Ayatollah Mohammad Mahdi Mirbagheri stated that a decisive and unanimous opinion was reached following what he described as great efforts to determine the new leadership. Following Representative Hojatossalam Jafari added that he hoped that the Iranian people would be satisfied as soon as possible, describing the delay in electing a third leader as bitter and unwanted for the nation. The 88-member assembly is constitutionally tasked with filling the vacuum left by Khamenei, who ruled for nearly 37 years before being killed in a US strike in Tehran on the 28th of February. The announcement comes under a direct shadow of violence as the Israeli military issued a new threat in Farsi today, vowing to pursue any successor to the late Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who was killed in the US strikes. The military also warned it would target any individuals involved in the appointment process. On the ground, the conflict continues to escalate. The United Arab Emirates Defense Ministry says its air defenses are currently responding to incoming missiles and drones from Iran. These retaliatory strikes have already proven fatal in the Emirates, where 4 citizens from Pakistan, Nepal and Bangladesh were killed. In Tehran, the humanitarian and environmental situation is deteriorating. The Iranian Red Crescent Society reports that nearly 10,000 civilian units were destroyed. Following Israeli strikes on oil facilities, leaking fuel entered the sewage system, igniting what witnesses described as a river of fire through the streets of the capital. Fawad Izadi, a professor at the University of Tehran, suggested the timing of the US strikes was calculated to coincide with local rainfall, creating a black ink of contaminated precipitation over the city. Diplomatic confusion is also mounting. While President Pezeshkian offered an apology to neighbouring countries for Tehran's retaliatory strikes, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps publicly disapproved of his remarks, warning that attacks will continue if neighbouring territories are used by the US or Israel. Khalid Al-Jabir of the Middle East Council on Global Affairs says that this lack of unified leadership makes it nearly impossible to find a partner for dialogue. International condemnation is growing, with Swiss Defense Minister Martin Feitster stating that the US and Israeli attacks on Iran constitute a violation of international law. In Rome, Pope Leo used his Angelus prayer in St. Peter's Square to describe the news from the Middle East as deeply troubling, urging an immediate end to the violence. The regional impact is spreading to the Mediterranean and beyond. President Emmanuel Macron is due to visit Cyprus tomorrow as France deploys warships, following a recent Iranian man-made drone attack on the island. Meanwhile, Oman Air cancelled all flights to major regional hubs until the 15th of this month due to airspace closures. Further afield, Norwegian police are investigating a loud blast that occurred overnight near the US Embassy in Oslo. While no injuries were reported, authorities say they are treating the explosion as a potential act of terror. The human cost remains staggering. The Lebanese Health Ministry reports that 394 people were killed in Israeli attacks, including 83 children. In Israel, the Health Ministry says nearly 2,000 people were hospitalized since the start of the war. Meanwhile, China has used its annual diplomatic showcase to demand an immediate ceasefire in the Middle East and a radical overhaul of the United Nations. Speaking in Beijing, Foreign Minister Wang Yi described the situation in the Middle East as a war that should not have happened, warning that the use of force provides no solution and only breeds further hatred. He outlined 5 fundamental principles for a settlement, headed by the absolute respect for Iranian sovereignty and a total rejection of what he termed the law of the jungle. He insisted that the people of the Middle East must remain the true masters of their own affairs, pointedly dismissing any attempts at regime change or colour revolutions.
Entertainment news on Gold FM.
Director Quentin Tarantino is preparing to launch his first stage play in London's West End, with an expected premiere in January 2027.
Sports news on Gold FM.
New Zealand won the toss and elected to bowl first in the final of the ICC T20 World Cup against defending champions India. New Zealand is eyeing their maiden T20 World Cup win, while Suryakumar Yadav's side is aiming to clinch their second consecutive World Cup win. The match will commence shortly in Ahmedabad at 7 p.m. That's it for now. This is Zulia De Silva for Gold FM. Thank you, and have a lovely evening ahead.
The Total Request Weekend on your #1 retro station.
Gold FM.
Every journey deserves luxury. The Denza B5 and Denza B8 are luxury SUV